Dave, thanks for asking. The book is called Single Seat Wisdom, and we're single seat fighter pilots. So our jets have one seat, and there's a certain amount of there's a certain personality and a certain amount of training and certain things that go on in your brain and how you're wired when it's just you, because you're in charge of the airplane, taking it out, bringing it back. That doesn't mean that we are individualistic. We work as a team, but that's what the single seat background means. And a lot of our stuff is, single seat mindset. It's single seat wisdom. It's, so that's where kind of that theme comes from. And single seat wisdom is actually a book. It's written, because we found out that we, being our collective group, we're now over 40 fighter pilots in our group at Single Seat Mindset. And as we started to write and guide, we found that, wow, this stuff is leverageable outside of just being a fighter pilot. And specifically, we guide those that have an action-based mindset. And, because fighter pilots, we make decisions, at very high speeds, 800 plus miles an hour. If you're familiar with the speed of sound, we're over the speed of sound quite a bit. And putting the right decision-making hurdles in place. Those decision-making skills at high speeds, and they're really leverageable to other professions that are peak performing professions, right? That require that type of mindset.
Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. I have a guest with me today, quite unique. I can tell you I've never had somebody with this experience and background on the podcast before. Dominic Slice Teich is with me, and we're going to be talking about a lot of amazing things with a pilot and so much more. But joining me from Arizona today, Dominic, how are you?
Dave, I'm so good. Weather's getting better here, and life is good. We're blessed. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, so it's mid-September. It's not quite as hot now, right?
Yeah, and I mean, good for us is when the lows at night start getting below 80 degrees.
Okay. Wow.
So it's probably still pretty warm for many.
That's warm for Canada. Wow. Yeah, that's a little bit warm. So Dom, welcome to the podcast. So glad to have you here. I've been listening to you on other shows and checking out websites and doing my research. There's so much we can talk about today. You have a very interesting background. Can you kind of bring some people up to speed on your background and maybe why you were writing the books you're writing today? Because I think your story is quite unique. I'd love to kind of share that with the audience.
Yeah, sure. So 50,000 foot view. When I grew up, I had an itch to fly. At 7 years old, I found myself, building a fighter jet model with my dad on the kitchen table, and then standing on a flight deck at 12 years old while the engine mechanics that my uncle worked with were running the engines for a large airliner, followed by, joining a school to become an aircraft mechanic, and then finding out that I could actually be a pilot, and then starting to fly at 16, civilian instructing at 18, and then applying to the military a few times and finally getting in and, finding myself in a fighter jet. And, that path, becoming a fighter jet pilot essentially is what really opened a door for me mentally to really get after life and start businesses and, buy real estate and just use a lot of the talents and life experiences that I had growing up, as well as, kind of what I had learned as a fighter pilot, and leveraging a lot of that stuff into bigger things. And now we're really the purpose-driven approach that we have now is through our company Single Seat Mindset. And we are man, grown so fast in the last couple of years. But I used a lot of the tools that I learned as a fighter pilot to leverage into a real estate business that I own, where we buy multifamily properties. And then I used a lot of that information because I had written a book there to start another business and start writing books and, websites and basically coaching for the next generation and for the current generation too, to give back a lot of stuff that we learn. And the most impactful part about single seat mindset is that I personally don't make any money. We give all the money to a children's cancer nonprofit. So that I think is one of the most impactful things that I've ever done in my life, just because I am so, probably a lot of Americans, a lot of the world, I would say, is very concerned about money and making more money and getting more stuff. And taking that off my plate for that business really allows me to ask, like, why are we doing this? And the purpose is a lot bigger than us. It's sharing other fighter pilot stories. It's helping new fighter pilots. It's helping, businesses, coaches, athletes, anybody that's in a peak performing profession, or wants to be a peak performer within their profession. We can guide them with that. We're not going to be able to do it for them, but that's who we help.
Okay. Is there a connection with the charity of choice that you're supporting? Is there a story behind that as well?
Yeah. So the Anna Schindler Foundation, Anna, the girl, she had a rare, I think it was a liver cancer, and I'm not going to say the medical term because I'll butcher it. Mm-hmm. But she battled that for 5 or 6 months, and she died just after she turned 7. She was my cousin. So my aunt and uncle actually run that foundation. And so that was kind of the personal connection. We did name one of our kids Anna, just so that she can kind of carry on that legacy. But yes, we have a very personal family connection to it. They are a charitable organization, so they are a 501c. And then, we know when we're giving the money to them, where the money's going, because we can see it and we're family.
I love it. So that's amazing that you're turning the resources to support that. And I've had family members with cancer as well. So thank you for organizing that and helping this to carry on and carry that memory on. That's amazing. Tell me a little bit about your first time behind the controls and you're cleared to take off and you're in this jet. What does that feel like? Like you talk about your story as a kid, building the model, and now you're in it for real. It's your turn to go. What does that feel like?
Yeah. So I would say that experience was a little bit different than the first time, clearly, that I had essentially taken off in a civilian aircraft. The civilian aircraft was, I think, maybe a little bit more surprising for me. The civilian aircraft, it felt like I was on a lawn chair with a lawnmower engine on the front of it. And we were just rattling down the runway and we got airborne. And there was this sense of going, wow, I am literally on the edge of death right now. But the jet fighter takeoff, the actual acceleration that you feel, I can compare it to probably, if you've flown on a civilian airliner, and they've done a pretty high power takeoff, it's maybe just a little bit more intense than that, but not much. So that feeling of acceleration, it's a very linear feeling, unlike, if you were sitting in a drag car that goes from, 0 to 100 plus miles an hour in a matter of a second or two. It's not that fast of acceleration. But I think the biggest difference was how smooth it was and how the jet just kind of, slipped into the air and then how fast it accelerated. That was, I think, the real surprising thing is that once you do start to pick up speed, is that you're then going really, really fast. And then I was out of control and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And the instructor in the back seat for the first jet fighter I was in had to take the controls and fly because I was out of control. so to speak, for just a few moments where I was just, things were going too fast for me because I hadn't gone that fast before.
Can't process.
Yeah.
What have you learned about your brain in all of this? Like, I remember hearing you on other podcasts, and you have things happening at such a fast amount of speed as you're going so fast. And like, how much can your brain comprehend? I don't even know how you can keep track of everything going that fast.
Well,
Like,
I think, when anybody's learning anything, right? So even if you're in sports, right, you're the first time you're standing in the batter's box and you have a baseball being thrown by you and you're supposed to hit it, you're very, and I'm not a doctor or anything, but I do know a little bit about the brain and your prefrontal cortex where the information goes in. That's like the thinking part of your brain. And so when you're doing your math homework, or you're trying to learn calculus, or you're doing any of those big brain things, you're doing a lot of thinking here. The problem with that in sports or in aviation is that if you're operating and you're trying to think in like your prefrontal cortex, it's going to cause some issues, because as you're going faster in an airplane, as we know, you can't pull over, right? So you have to make a decision as you go, and there's no pausing the simulator. There's no crashing and putting another quarter in. There's no starting over like a video game. And so the empowering thing to think is that, or to know, is that, I don't think I grew up wired to be a fighter pilot. That's something that I learned throughout the years, through training and through practice and study. And what you end up doing, and I played a lot of baseball too, which is why I'm using that analogy. But, baseball, even if you can push that information back to your motor cortex, like towards the back of your brain, where you are now reacting to stimuli, and you don't have to think about it per se. That's where you start to win. And that's how you become a better fighter pilot. That's how you become a better athlete. And honestly, that's probably how you just become better at life, is if you're thinking about stuff all the time, life goes too fast. And so what I learned through that is a lot of the skills that I had growing up, downhill skiing, playing baseball, riding dirt bikes, all that stuff, is that life moves forward. And if you can push that information and you can learn it into your motor cortex, then you're making decisions, but they are almost kind of second nature, right? They're but that comes through practice, experience, a lot of mistakes. And I think that's really, the civilian flight school that I instructed in, as well as the military school that I instructed in, and I'm still instructing in, we have syllabus. And so we have this blocking and tackling approach, to use an analogy of, hey, we start out with this. We're going to teach you how to, like, here's an airplane, right? Here's the systems. Here's how you start it. Here's how you taxi out to the runway. And so there's all these little pieces of information that you start to link together. And then as you get good at those, then you add something else, right? You go, okay, cool. We got blocking and tackling down. Let's go through some running drills and passing drills. And pretty soon, the stuff that you thought was difficult in the past, it starts to get easier because of repetition and practice, and not tons of practice, but perfect practice.
So, okay, what is more dangerous now that you're teaching and instructing new pilots or people upgrading their skills? What's more dangerous, arrogance or incompetence, or both?
Oh boy. I can say that in my career field, if I was to pick one, and I'm going to throw myself under the bus on this, because our training is so good, specifically U.S. fighter pilot training, and there are other countries that do fighter pilot training very well as well. Canada's one of them. We have a lot of multinational partners that they're very, very good fighter pilots. I'm speaking to I've only been in American fighter squadrons, so I can't speak to the other countries, but I've flown around them, and they're good fighter pilots too. So I would say that because our training is so good, and because to even become a fighter pilot, to even get in the door and fly a fighter jet, your competence level has to be high enough and you have to care enough in order to be there. Otherwise you get kicked out. We call it getting washed out. So you're not going to be, you have to have a certain level of competence to even be there in the first place. And I would say that competence probably isn't good enough in our career field because you're going to get shot or killed or do something stupid. And me specifically, and unfortunately, arrogance and not being able to accept feedback and thinking that you are better than you are is a trap. It's a big trap, especially in our career field. And I wish I could say that I've never been arrogant and that I was always humble, and that's just not the truth. I've had a lot of mistakes. There's been many times where I should have just owned up to my mistake and just taken ownership of it, and things would have moved a lot faster and better, and I would have learned from it. So I say all that specifically in very high performance professions. I think arrogance is probably going to get in your way because the competence should be there.
Because I could just imagine if somebody's skipping through the syllabus going, well, I've already read this. I know this. I saw that in a movie once, and they're just like, I got this. And you're like, listen, your life is on the line. My life is on the line. So I don't need you to skip ahead. I need you to listen. There's a reason why this information is there. And I just, in life in general, I just find that sometimes arrogance can lead to error, which could have effects on others. And I just, in this line of work, in what you do, I don't see a lot of margin for error at all.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I like I said, I'm kind of at a loss for words right now because I'm thinking about all the times where I could have just done better and been more humble and just, taken that humble pie to the face and gone, well, I'll move on. And I learned from it. And unfortunately, it was probably about year 10 in the military where I had gone through some mistakes as a young guy, as a newer guy, in a new squadron that I had been in. And it was a defining moment in my life where, and it was painful too. And I just owned it. And I said, I messed up. That was my fault. I could do this better. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and I'm moving forward. And holy smokes, the amount of people that were willing to just roll the red carpet out and help me and go, oh, this dude owned up to what he did wrong and he's ready to move on. And that's a person that's ready to learn. So your competence can become, it can take on new meaning and new levels because people are going to help you because you're humble, right? And so that was even kind of holding me back a little bit to be a better fighter pilot because people will help you, they'll guide you, they'll give more to you when you're humble and you say, I don't know anything. Can you help me? Or, hey, I don't know about this. Can you, lend a hand?
Yeah. And I think I heard you on another podcast episode, and I bring this up because I found it to be quite revealing about you as a person. But there's a time where it goes beyond knowledge and head knowledge and reaction time. And there's a point in time where you realize that you need to know yourself and where you're at in the moment and whether or not you're fit to do what you're being called to do. And you shared a story about where you were all set to go and you're like, wait a minute, no, it's not right. We're not going to do this today. And I'm like, when I heard you mention that, maybe you can expand on a little bit more, but for you to make that call and say, no, I'm not, it's not, for some reason, there's something not right today. So we're not going to do this. That speaks highly because you could just be like, bravo, macho. I know what I'm doing. I'm the leader. Let's just do this anyway. But there could have been an outcome that would have been not favorable in that situation.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of concepts and I don't want to, if people have seen other stuff, I don't want to duplicate. So the stuff that I would say about that as I think about it is that, a lot of think macho career fields that have a lot on the line, whether that's professional sports or ER doctors or police officers, fighter pilots, airline pilots, anybody that, race car drivers, you name it, they're under a lot of pressure. And there's this, at least within our community, there's this idea of compartmentalization, right? So you put things into compartments. When I go fly, I'm in my flying compartment, and I need to have my mind focused on flying and what's going on at that time. And my family goes into a compartment over here, and my life issues go into a compartment over here. The concept itself, I think there's goodness to it, but there's always another side of the coin. In fact, there's three sides. There's the edge of the coin, and then there's the two sides. And so I think if this concept that I'm kind of thinking of right now is at that point, I had thought of compartmentalization as a one-sided thing. And it wasn't until I stood on the edge of the coin, right, that thin part of the coin, where I could then look over and go, well, oh, there's another side to this coin. And that side is the other side of compartmentalization. And when you compartmentalize during high performance or dangerous activities, right? So if you're on a deployment and you're over bad guy territory, you need to have your mind focused on that. So compartmentalization is good. The problem is you can't always do that. And the reason being is that you need to address life. Life happens around you. And that was, I think, the analogy I'm making is that day I stood on the edge of the coin and I looked over to the other side, and I realized that I had been compartmentalizing so long that it was too much for me that day, right? And granted, I had gone through, like I had said before, as a new guy, this is many years even after that first experience where I was like, I'm wrong, and I started taking ownership of my life and my mistakes, right? And that's where I started to see a lot of progress just in my own life. But this compartmentalization can lead to what I would term as like the trash can effect, where the bad things in your life that happen, you shove them into a trash can, and you slam the lid on. And that day, somebody shoved a hand grenade in my trash can and it blew the lid off. And I had a lifetime of trash that I'd never taken the trash out. Mm-hmm. And I had just, people call it suppression. You just suppress it, right? Like bad thing happens in your life, just push it down and suppress it. Try not to think about it. And that works for a while. It worked for many years for me until it didn't. And it blew up in my face. And luckily at that point, I had gone through some painful experiences in my life to know that it's okay to, have it together. And then one day just be like, I just don't have it together today. And to be able to admit that. Now, if every day you don't have it together, there's other issues, right? Mm-hmm. But, that day I just was on the edge of the coin, and I just looked over the other side, and I was like, man, my trash can is blowing up, and I cannot as all the trash is up in the air. It's like, I can't put that back in the trash can and go fly and have my mind on teaching, because I was leading multiple aircraft that day. There were multiple students in the formation. There were new concepts, and it was a flight that I couldn't just step out the door and wing, right? I had to be on my A game.
Yeah. Okay. So I love hearing that side. Can you share a little bit about the book that you've written? You've written, I guess, several different things you're working on. But the book that you've written that kind of encompasses pilots and the stories behind the pilots, and maybe a little bit about, I know it's geared towards pilots and supporting them, but there's other people who will never fly a fighter jet. My chances of me ever flying a fighter jet are pretty slim, but what I can learn from your book as well as a civilian reading this.
Yeah. So, Dave, thanks for asking. The book is called Single Seat Wisdom. And believe it or not, the initial push of the company's single seat mindset, right? So just so that everybody's on the same page, why am I saying single seat so much? We're single seat fighter pilots. So our jets have one seat, and there's a certain amount of there's a certain personality and a certain amount of training and certain things that go on in your brain and how you're wired when it's just you, because you're in charge of the airplane, taking it out, bringing it back. That doesn't mean that we are individualistic. We work as a team, but that's what the single seat background means. And a lot of our stuff is, single seat mindset. It's single seat wisdom. It's, so that's where kind of that theme comes from. And single seat wisdom is actually a book. It's written, because we found out that we, being our collective group, we're now over 40 fighter pilots in our group at Single Seat Mindset. And as we started to write and guide, we found that, wow, this stuff is leverageable outside of just being a fighter pilot. And specifically, we guide those that have an action-based mindset, right? That are doing things in their life. If you're a victim and you're sitting on the couch and you don't want to do anything, I can't help you. Our stuff, maybe you could read Single Seat Wisdom and it would give you some inspiration to get going. But we really help those that want to go somewhere with their lives. And those goal-oriented individuals, they get stuck with, these slow processes where they can't see the outcome that they're trying to get, right? So they're just kind of frustrated along their path because they're running at full speed, but they don't have any guidance. They don't have that coach. And that's kind of what our products help with. And, because fighter pilots, we make decisions, at very high speeds, 800 plus miles an hour. If you're familiar with the speed of sound, we're over the speed of sound quite a bit. And putting the right decision-making hurdles in place, right? Or pushing hurdles out of the way, or, making sure that we line those up correctly. Those decision-making skills at high speeds, and they're really leverageable to other professions that are peak performing professions, right? That require that type of mindset. So that's kind of the genesis of the single seat idea, the single seat wisdom. And that's why I started this online group of fighter pilots to get us all together and start sharing some of our life lessons. And it's a radically different perspective. So Single Seat Wisdom, the book, is a series, and each chapter is written by a different fighter pilot. And why that's so powerful is that some of these stories, as they come across my desk, because I compile all these stories. It's my publishing company, it's my company, but they're those authors, they contribute to that children's cancer nonprofit to be a part of this, and then they also write a story. And their stories, granted, I kind of give them some boundaries on what to write, but they're short. I mean, we're talking probably less than 1,500 words. So you can sit down in 10 minutes and you can read about, what is the art of a fighter pilot debrief? Is why would I want to debrief? You could read a story about my good friend who's a Top Gun graduate and weapons officer who crashed an airplane on his third or fourth flight, lived through it, and became, a Top Gun pilot. And then at the end of each chapter, it sums it all up and it gives that fighter pilot's wisdom. And it's very applicable to a lot of walks of life. I mean, one of them is on perspective, and the fighter pilot lost his wife to cancer, and he talks about that story. It's very emotional. At the end, he sums it all up and says, well, here's what I learned from that. And it's a fighter pilot's mindset, essentially being re-wickered into a way where other people can read that and it's helpful and it's impactful. I mean, that story specifically took me about 4 times to get through without just breaking down because it was so emotional. But then others, just reading, I'm like, wow, I've never even been introduced to that concept before. I didn't even know about that. So even for me, as I'm putting these books together and we're editing them and getting them ready to, publish, there's stuff in there that I'm learning from. So it was kind of a wake up call too, to maybe put my humble hat back on and go, well, you don't know everything and you never will.
Okay. So that's amazing. We're going to have links to the books and the website and everything as well. I have a few questions that I've been holding on to, and I kind of want to throw these at you. Again, we're not giving away any military secrets or anything, but I'm just curious. Whenever I go to an air show or anything, I feel like I never get a chance to talk to the pilots. They're always surrounded. You're like, oh, I just have some questions. I want to nerd out and ask some things. But everyone wants a photo, and that's great. I love it. But I have you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask my questions and see. Okay. We talk about, you have a call sign.
Yep.
and yours is Slice.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay. From what I understand, you don't get to pick your own call sign. Is this true?
That's correct. Yep. It's given to you.
So, okay. So yours is Slice. I'd love to hear a little bit about that story, but is there another call sign that you just love and it just makes you smile, or there's a really cool story behind it on top of yours?
On top of mine. Let me chew on that one, because I haven't gotten that question before.
Okay, but let's do your call sign first.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people can understand and relate, even outside of being a fighter pilot. As you're growing up, you're given a nickname by your friends or whatever. So like we don't get to pick our call signs. Some are actually not great call signs, especially if they are, so there's more to it. There's more below the surface a lot of times. So even if on the outside you may think, oh, that's a cool call sign, it may be an acronym that doesn't mean something super cool. And that's the story behind the call sign. Mine is just, mine is Slice. There's no acronym behind it. Each letter doesn't represent anything. But mine was, I got it when I was learning how to, I was young in the fighter jet world. And I had a very close pass with another aircraft that, we were close, right? So if things didn't go the way they went, and I would have done something, I would have been better. We would have been just fine that day, but I didn't. So I messed up. I broke what's called a training rule. It's supposed to keep you safe in training, and I had a really close pass. It was in, people are familiar with dog fighting. So I was doing essentially a dog fight with another aircraft with an instructor. So I had a close pass, and they said during the naming ceremony that went on, they said that I almost sliced my instructor in half. And that also fit because we were in Japan at the time, and we were in a squadron, the Samurai Squadron. So that was my call sign. The other one that they were thinking about giving me was MacGyver, because not too long before that, it was when I was kind of, I was going through some painful times in my life, right? I'd kind of hinted at it earlier, but just kind of taking some humble pie and admitting that I was wrong. And that was, unfortunately, I hadn't learned that earlier in my career and in my life, but I was there now. And the reason they wanted to call me MacGyver is because I had realized that I just needed to be a lot better, take ownership of what was going on, learn, ask for help, all that kind of stuff. And then I basically went through our whole secure area inside our building, and I put up new whiteboards. I helped a guy replace all of these, whatever they were. We soldered a bunch of these, I don't know if they were some sort of electrical component in the back of these TVs that were having issues. I installed new computers and landlines and all this stuff. And I did stuff that most fighter pilots don't know how to do or just don't do. And the worst part of it was there was a sink, like a faucet in the back, way, way, way in the back. And it hadn't been used in years. It had boxes stacked around it. And I went back there because I was trying to make sure that everything worked in our secure area, because not a lot of people get to go back there. And I went back there and I turned the water on, and it just the sink was plugged. And so I went to a local Japanese store, and I got like one of those metal snake things, and I pulled out probably about 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of like chewing tobacco and coffee grounds and hair and just some of the most stinky, nasty stuff that you can imagine that had been just fermenting in the pipes. And I just remember people's face just going, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm like, well, the sink works now, right? And just being able to have a sink back on. So they wanted to name me MacGyver, which, if you know the story behind that, but I don't know. So let me circle back to my favorite call sign. It's definitely not Maverick, because no. I think a lot of people would.
Come on, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's not Goose either. But yeah, let me think about that one. I'll come back to it.
Mine might be Soup, because I'm Campbell. That's my last name. Maybe I'd get Soup. Okay, so another question. You're flying. You're up there. You're doing your thing. What are you hearing in your ears? Like who's talking to you? What kind of information are you filtering? Is everything for you that you're hearing? Are you hearing like I'm curious to, but how much information, because you're dealing with all these things and you're flying at this incredible speed and people are yakking in your ear. What are you hearing? Is it just for you?
No, in fact, a lot of times, probably, well, it really depends, right? That's kind of a vague answer, but many times a lot of the information is not directly for you, but it helps you, kind of paint a picture of what's going on. And we call that situational awareness. So, and it's only one of the things, right? So hearing, we being fighter pilots wear helmets. So it's a special helmet that has these special straps, and when you increase any sort of the G forces on the aircraft, if you're familiar with that term, it blows up different bladders in the back of your helmet, and there's different pressures that go into your mask so that you can breathe better. So the mask and the helmet and all of that whole concoction that's on top of your nugget is it's pretty complex. And then there's ear cups, and inside the ear cups there's a speaker, right? That or you can wear special earplugs that are connected to the radios. And in our jet, it depends on what aircraft you're in. Most fighter jets have multiple radios, so there are different frequencies that you can tune into, and there's all sorts of different types of radios as well. There's and that's its own subject in itself. Okay. So when you tune the radios in, the way that I would say just generically what you're hearing within your headset is your own group of fighter jets that you're working with. So in our case, let's say there's 4 of us, and if I'm the instructor or if I'm the flight lead, there are 3 aircraft on the same frequency, and there may be more. We may have 8 or 12, but that's what we call like the interflight frequency, and that allows us to communicate with those on our team pretty quickly. And then there's usually another frequency, at least one more, so at least 2 frequencies that you're on. And the other one is, it could be air traffic control. It could be if you're doing an air-to-air fight, it could be the fight frequency. So it could be like literally all of the other aircraft are on that frequency. And when you say something, you're going to hear it. And then you can imagine if you put a bunch of type A personalities on one frequency and there's only one person can talk at a time, you can see how people are stepping on each other and talking over each other, and that's its own challenge. So, radio discipline is also an important thing. But I think the thing that I'm trying to sum up is that the radios and what you're hearing is only a tiny little piece to build your situational awareness, right? Because you have what you're seeing outside the jet. You have your instruments that help you, either stay upright if that's what you want to do, or maneuver the aircraft. There's computers that show you, a 2D, 2-dimensional picture of where you are in space. And then there's all of the different weapons menus and all that stuff based on the aircraft that you're in that you have to manage. Not even to mention your own, hey, I have to go to the bathroom. Like, what do you do in a fighter jet when you have to go to the bathroom? I had this talk at the dinner table with my kids last night, and it kind of surprised them. And I was like, well, what do you think I do? Do you think I pull over and go to the bathroom? I'm like, no, there's even things for that. So to answer your question, the radios, the information that we're receiving, it kind of helps you build a picture of what's going on around you, as well as communicate with your flight or communicate with outside agencies. And then I'd say one of the biggest things is that hearing, that's one of the first things to go if you get what we call task saturated. So you start information overload. there's too much stuff going in, right? Your eyes and you're sensing stuff, but then you just stop hearing, right? And even as men, if you're working on something and your kid or your wife or somebody comes over and you're kind of hyper focused on that, you may not hear them because you're so focused on what you're doing. And the same thing happens in a fighter jet.
Okay, I have two more, and then I'm sorry, there's so many. Have you done any kind of fun things for your job where you're like flying over a football game at the beginning of the game or something? Somebody's like, hey guys, anybody want to do this? Or you're assigned to do something that's not normal, everyday stuff that you get to do. And you're like, yeah, I want to go do that. Any cool things you got to do?
Yes. I mean, that list it's not endless, but there are so many things that are fun to do, whether those are flyovers or what have you. I would say there are 3 flights, but 2 instances that are the most memorable to me. The first instance was as a young lieutenant. I was asked to be in a 4 aircraft flyby over the Martinsville Speedway. So the NASCAR Speedway out on the East Coast. And, as a young guy, I was like, wow, I just got invited to do that. So we had to fly from, Texas out to the East Coast. And, I wasn't leading it. I was too young and I wasn't experienced enough. But I remember seeing the preparation, all that stuff that goes into being over the stadium at the right time and all of the planning and all the factors that can get in your way of making that happen, right? Because as you watch fighter jets go by, you're like, oh, that was cool. But what you don't see is all of the stuff that goes on in the background. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And as we're on that one specifically, as we are getting ready to fly over the stadium, the Good Year Blimp is sitting over the stadium as we're on our final run. And I remember the guy leading the 4 aircraft for the flyby, he said, hey, can you move the blimp? And we all know that blimps don't move very fast. And so as a young guy, I'm like, oh, we're going to have to call this off. It's not going to work, right? Because they're right there. Well, they were able to move the blimp far enough away. And as we passed, I remember kind of like glancing out the side of, the canopy of the jet and seeing the people inside the blimp, like arms in the air, just like, yeah, this is so awesome. And they had like an up front seat. And I almost feel like that maybe they were doing that on purpose. But that was the first instance that was so much fun. And then as I got a little bit more experienced, I went cross country to Spokane, Washington. So I got to fly into my hometown. And that was the first of 2 times I got to do that. And that's when I met my wife. Was the first time I flew in a jet and got to meet her through friends there. And then the second time was even more memorable because I got to bring another friend up there, and we got to go in for an actual air show. And just flying over the hometown and seeing where I grew up downhill skiing and water skiing and just knowing where everything was. And then, the weather was perfect. And then as we pulled in, it was the military family day. So we are driving these aircraft or taxiing them in, if you will. And there's just all these military families and kids standing, really close to the aircraft, watching us come in. And I remember being one of those kids and just going, how in the heck do you ever even make that happen? And, standing at the air show the next day and answering questions from people, that come up and taking pictures. And it was super cool because after that, I took off and I did an unrestricted climb, which is, you get going really fast down low, and then you pull the nose of the aircraft, not straight up, but pretty high up. And I went from the field elevation there to 28,000 feet. And I went from Spokane to Phoenix in, I don't even remember. It was less than 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half or so. And so a very memorable flight, getting home without having to go through airport security and, all the stuff that even I have to do outside of that environment.
So have you ever been on a plane as a passenger and they're like, is there a pilot on board? Has that ever happened? That's movie stuff, I know.
No, it hasn't, thank God. Good. And I'm going to knock on some wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that is and believe it or not, like you can rest easy because there are usually there are pilots in just regular old clothes sitting on most of the flights where they're what's called deadheading. They're moving to their base to go fly an actual airplane and start making money or whatever. So usually there are pilots in disguise everywhere, just like there are doctors and nurses, just like there are what are they called? Wardens, air wardens. You just don't see them, but they're there.
Okay. All right. So you were sharing before we hit record, and we're going to end off with this. You were out for your bike ride this morning, and you're doing some thinking about a new co-authoring book that you're working on. And you were mentioning that you were flying back over the States, and you had some thoughts coming up, and it was around the idea of virtue and discipline. And I'd love to end this off today, Dominic, with your thoughts on this. As you're kind of processing your thoughts for this new book you're working on, what are you when you're flying over, like you mentioned today, that you before we started recording, you're flying over, you're coming back home or back to your base. Some of the thoughts that you were kind of processing and how that kind of related to your ride this morning, kind of tie that in. Let's close off with that kind of thought.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times when I'm flying, I'm pretty engrossed in the flying aspect of flying. A few times I may kind of like depending on the situation, my mind may think of a thing or two, but usually it's when I'm back on the ground is when like those little nuggets that come to mind. And then I go, I got to be focused on my task. And I do what's called compartmentalization. We already talked about it, but I put that to the side and those come out specifically during a couple of activities, and it's different for everybody. But for me, when I'm mountain biking, that is where everything explodes in my mind. I don't listen to music or I don't listen to, books on tape or any of that kind of stuff when I'm mountain biking, because that's when my brain goes wild and I start thinking of stuff. So this morning, as I was biking, I kind of started to figure and the reason why I'm kind of stalling right now is that like I'm trying to figure out how to package in a very short timeline how I would talk about how we have all of these, we went through COVID as a whole world, right? So there's COVID, there's lockdowns, there's just so much violence and dividing lines politically and in every way, shape, or form. And it's like, what is the one thing? How and this book that I'm co-authoring is about it's called I Love America. But the concepts, these aren't new, right? These are Greco-Roman era concepts, specifically Greek, Western civilization Greek concepts that deal with discipline and virtue with a Christian spin on them. So, and the reason I say Christian spin is the Greeks were very class-based, and so you could love those and serve those within your class. And what Jesus did was he broke all those classes down. He said, we all love each other, right? You can love everybody. You could be the richest, you could be the president of the United States, you could be the president of the world, and you could love the beggar that's sitting under the street. And there's ways to do that, and that's through virtue and discipline. So the idea being, what would be the one thing? Hey, we've got all of these problems going on in our world. What is the one thing that could reunite the United States of America, that could reunite? And, I'm having a conversation with somebody and we get into an argument or whatever, but we end that argument maybe disagreeing with each other's concepts, but not ripping each other apart, and definitely not stopping the conversation just because you feel offended or just because, what I'm saying? So like the concepts being very simple, and these are not my concepts, but I think the thing that would really bring us all back together is if we all exercised some discipline, right? To not lash out at a person that is lashing out back at us, right? That we, and that only comes through an action-based mindset. And so, Vince Lombardi, I think I want to say he was the coach of the Green Bay Packers. He said, confidence is contagious, and so is lack of confidence. And so I kind of took that and spun it in a different way. And I say action is contagious, and so is lack of action. And in order to be disciplined, you need to have an active lifestyle. You need to actively think about those things. So I'm talking about waking up in the morning and stretching and exercising and, not eating that Snickers bar at 10 in the morning and, all of those little habits that you have during your day. Be disciplined to remove those. And then also the virtue thing that we were talking about earlier is just, the faith, hope, and love, right? So we can have faith that the world can be better. We can have hope that that'll be, and then love, that's an active thing, right? So as we love people and we learn to do that better, which I think it's always something that we can be better at. That's kind of hey, well, what would be the one thing? And I think at an individual level, every single person, if they infuse just a little bit of discipline in every day and they worked on their virtue, not virtue signaling, I'm talking actual virtues that are deeper than that. We could change our organizations, our institutions, our lives, families, schools, just one person at a time, because action is contagious and so is lack of action. And also your example is contagious, and bad example is also really contagious. So those are kind of the little nuggets that I was thinking about as I was pedaling around this morning, trying to get home in time so that we could take the kids to school and get the day going.
So Dom, people that are listening this far, thank you for listening to the podcast this far. These are our true listeners. These are the people that really have followed the content and want to hear more from you. Is there anything special we can offer to these people that have listened this far?
Yeah. So everybody can find me on singleseatmindset.com. There is a special hidden page at singleseatmindset.com if you go /podcast guest. And if you go there, I have a special gift for you. You are in Canada, and I think this would still be okay. I did have a host ask, and I think he was in Sri Lanka or Malaysia. So within reason, I do have a gift for you, and I can figure out how to get a gift to the first 3 people to find it. So singleseatmindset.com is the main website. If you just put /podcast guest, all lowercase, all one word, there's a little gift for your listeners there.
That's great. And if somebody has questions about becoming a fighter pilot or aviation, or how do I even start? I've got the little model on my kitchen table. Now what? They can reach out and maybe ask a question, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Excellent. So definitely go there.
Singleseatmindset.com. There's a contact button right there.
Yeah. And you can reach out and you'll be the one responding?
Yes, sir. Goes right to me.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. So thank you so much for your time. And Dom, thank you for sharing your perspective from the cockpit of your jet as you fly over and serve and help the next generation serve as well. Thank you for your service to your country and to all of us. And again, your perspective is amazing, and you've been so gracious with your time. We've definitely gone over, and I just thank you so much for making time today for this. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for what you're doing, Dave, and thanks for having me on your show and helping me get the word out.
Excellent. Everyone go check them out. Go give them all the likes and the love. And we'll end off with something from your favorite fighter pilot movie theme song in the background. But thank you so much, Tom, for your time. Excellent.
You bet.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Jump over to livingthenextchapter.com, our website, and you will see a spot where you can leave a voice message. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to hear from you. So if you want your voice on this podcast, yes, that's possible. Go to livingthenextchapter.com. Click the little microphone icon, leave a voice message, and we'll insert your message into the podcast. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us your favorite guest. Maybe there's a guest we should have on the podcast. Maybe you should be our next guest. Leave us a message, livingthenextchapter.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast episode with one person. That's all we're asking. Meet you over there at livingthenextchapter.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Love to hear from you. Till the next episode. It's coming up right away. Be sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for supporting our guests. Great day.